Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. It's Fran here, and I'm back with my Game Week 33 cheat sheet preview. Now, this obviously is a massive double game week, and I think the implications of it being massive is because so many people are going to be debating between a free hit on this week in 33 and also one in 37, even potentially in 34 if they wanted to switch things up. The news about a potential Man United versus Chelsea game coming in 34 does have a little bit of impact in terms of the longevity of some transfers, and so therefore someone like a Bruno is a very interesting option as a 2 week stopgap. Whilst we're still thinking about Salah and KDB as our premier midfield options alongside someone like a Son/Kane, or maybe some people who have opted for threemium type teams could look at sort of a little bit of a staying on Bruno and maybe switching up to him for a bit for the short term, just because the expected points are so valuable and he should still have the opportunity to provide in these games. Now, let's actually start off with the defenders. This week, obviously, we have the Newcastle double game week, and I think it is worth mentioning that if you are free hitting, you should consider options alongside Schär, not only Schär. You could think about Burn and you can think about Target. I personally am a little bit more towards the camp of going for Target and Schär, but I don't think Target's underlying stats are actually that good, and therefore, if you really wanted just to go for one Newcastle player, the option that I've gone with for the previous few weeks is Schär, and I will kind of stick by that as the token option that I think you can go for to cover the Newcastle defense. Now, Ben White is still a great option heading towards this week. I don't think there's any reason for that other than he simply covers this Arsenal defense. There's no real reason for now to actually pick up any of the other Arsenal defenders because it doesn't seem like they will contribute very much on the attacking point of view. We also know this Arsenal team is very sensitive towards losing their clean sheet. And to be honest, I would actually suggest that Gabriel would drop right after this week. So I wouldn't really look towards going for the Arsenal defense as an option. I would just say this is pretty much the last week where you consider them as a premium option. And if you are someone who owns Ramsdale, then absolutely do not double dip into the Arsenal defense. As far as Schär, as I said, he is the most sensible Newcastle option to me. He's actually already contributed several times this season. Target has been very, very quiet on that front. And I don't think Newcastle particularly use their fullbacks in a way where they are asked and expected to actually create for this team. Fraser missing out is also quite a big significant drop, and I think that actually will hurt someone like a Wood and the overall ability for this Newcastle team to actually create progressive chances and actually score. So that's a little bit of a worrisome thing there. As far as the defense, I actually think they've been relatively good, apart from the drop off in the second half versus Spurs lately, and that's perhaps what you'd like to be wary of when you go into the Newcastle defense. If you're not free hitting, it's very sensible perhaps to make a transfer into Schär just to kind of cover off with some of the free hitters who will be going for a double Newcastle defense. But that's pretty much it for the week. As far as the Marte, I would say Marte is an option who has to rise this week just because at such a good price for a Leicester defender. And if you don't have the option to really go for Schmeichel, let's say you're an owner of Ramsdale and you already have enough doubles covered for the rest of the season, then it is quite sensible to maybe not look into the Schmeichel transfer. I do think a Schmeichel transfer towards the end of the season is very, very sensible. It's very likely that there's going to be rotation in the Leicester defense. Some people were touting up Fofana in the previous week and he did miss out. And Amartey was someone who played, and that's going to be the sort of situation you're dealt with. The nice thing about defenders is you don't really see too many situations where they do get subbed on. So in terms of the centre backs, let's say if you actually pick a centre back, if they get rested for the game, it's very likely that they're actually truly rested and you have your sub coming in. So that's a little bit different to a situation where, for example, if you look at Barnes, who didn't play in the previous week versus Crystal Palace, he comes on for a cameo and only gets 1 point, and that's very detrimental to FPL if you were planning for these Leicester players to actually contribute quite a bit, especially in a double game week. As far as the Burnley defender, I think they have to drop. I think Burnley have completely dropped off towards the back half of the season. They're not really creating as many goals as we expect. Yes, they did recently sort of beat Norwich, and that was quite a good positive sign for them, but I still think they're playing very, very poor football and not defending particularly well. That contrast from their first double game week where Pope actually got back-to-back clean sheets and the drop-off since then has been quite stark, and I think there's no real reason to look into a Burnley defender. This is the last week you really want to own a Burnley defender, and you probably want to switch off of them as soon as possible. As far as Chambers, he's been in a void for now. And Doherty, unfortunately, is still injured. So an extremely tough situation if you're a Doherty owner. I think the simple move actually is to move directly into someone like a Schär this week. Take advantage of the double game week, especially for a player who wasn't going to play anyways for the rest of the season. And that's probably your big little benefit because I can't really see any value in terms of going for a Burnley defender this week. As far as Emerson, he becomes a bit of a differential, but for me, the worrisome part is that he doesn't really contribute too much, even in effective goal scoring positions. And yes, he scored a goal recently, so it seems like apparently his form has increased. But I think beyond the fact that Tanganga's out for the rest of the season and Emerson's kind of locked down that right back position, I just feel like he doesn't contribute that much to the attack. As far as Spurs, I might even consider tripling up on Kane, Son, and Kulusevski. That's a very, very simple trio to go for. And I think the drop off when you go from a fullback to a defender in terms of a centre back for Tottenham isn't worthwhile. So I wouldn't look into an option such as Dyer in the near future. Chalobah, Cody, nothing really significant there. They're not going to be big options at all for this double game week. As far as Matip and Gabriel, I've spoken a little bit about Gabriel. This is once again probably one of the last remaining weeks you'd like to spend this much money on an Arsenal defender. I think since Tierney has found his way out of the team and gotten himself injured, you are dealing with a situation where Gabriel seems like a move that you'd actually like to move away from. And the reason for that is because this Arsenal team has dropped their underlying data for the defensive statistics. And we can clearly see from the eye test that there is a little bit missing when Partey isn't playing, who is the spine of the midfield. And with Xhaka also deputizing at left back, you have much less solidity there. You have Odegaard and Sambi playing, and I don't think they're as defensively astute at times. Yes, Xhaka is capable of the random error, but in general, the spine in terms of how they maintain possession, how well they press off the ball, that's really dropped off a cliff for me with Arsenal. I think the one little hidden gem is that Gabriel is a goal scoring option, and he's a threat in a double game week to score because he is such a strong centre back. And also with the attack, I don't think their underlying data has dropped off at all. I think if you're looking into an attacking Arsenal option, even though everyone seems to be moving away from Arsenal, I still think it's very logical to actually stick with at least one or two of these options. I wouldn't move away from them anytime soon, really, just because the games that they have in hand are quite good. Reguilon is someone who does rise this week. I do think he will be someone who benefits with Doherty going out. Hopefully he actually finds a little bit of form and fitness towards the end of the season, but we've seen Reguilon actually steadily kind of pick up points whenever he gets to play. The worrisome thing, of course, is he is also capable of being one of those defenders who gets rotated at 45 minutes because Sessegnon is also seemingly available, and that's kind of the risk that you're going to have to play with Reguilon, which is why I suggest going for a triple Spurs attack as opposed to looking towards defensive replacements. As far as Silva and Alonso, the new option that I've sort of provided here is just Alonso. I think Marcos Alonso has actually looked quite good in terms of fitness towards the back half of the season. I really liked his performance versus Real Madrid as well, and also the one in Southampton. He covered, I think, the most amount of distance in the Real Madrid game heading towards extra time, and I was really positively interested in his performance and his ability to contribute towards the back half of the season, especially as people will be looking to double up potentially on the Chelsea defense. If, let's say, you don't have enough money to go for someone like Rudiger and you want to save a little bit of money, I do think Alonso could be that sort of hidden gem gamble that is worth it, because the options that would deputize in place of him aren't very good. And that's pretty much the situation for the defenders right now. If we move towards the keepers, however, you'll actually see that Dubravka is going to be that option who does rise. I think he has a fantastic double this week. He's at a great price, so that's pretty much why he rises to the cream of the crop. Sanchez has a terrible double. I can't really see any reason why you'd like to play him if you have another replacement keeper. As far as Pickford, players like De Gea and Pope, just not much confidence in the defense at all, even though De Gea is someone who does have a double. I just think that, yes, perhaps it's very likely that United could keep a clean sheet versus Norwich, but overall we've seen them drop clean sheets versus teams that we don't really expect. And on top of that, the Liverpool game could be quite a harmful game for someone like De Gea. He could drop points in that game even, to be honest, with the current state of Man United. And I just don't really follow the logic where, yes, of course, we expect the caliber of this team on paper for United to finally kind of find an end to this sort of bad run of form, but you can't kind of just make that judgmental gamble anytime. You have to kind of see the signs there. I think what we're seeing on the pitch just isn't really reflecting a team that should be kind of changing their form towards the end of the season. I really think that they will end perhaps this back half with a little bit of a rotten state, just because you still have the new manager looming, and you have a manager currently in place who doesn't seem like he has the full dressing room. The dressing room doesn't seem particularly interested or motivated or unified in that front, and that's why I'm just overall concerned with picking Man United assets. I really think that for the stretch here, short term, even if they have double game weeks and they are announced, you really only want to be looking at one or two Man United players at best. If you're free hitting, yes, perhaps it makes sense to go for 2 or 3 players. But I really think 3, for example, would be pushing it too, given the form that they've actually shown. And I think the other doubles this week are actually still relatively good for teams that have shown similar or better form in Leicester, in Southampton, and Arsenal. As far as Schmeichel, he does rise to the cream of the crop. He has fantastic fixtures towards the end of the season, and he completely evades you from that sort of issue where you have all these defenders in Leicester who are constantly rotating. I've seen people go for the fullbacks to look for someone who's an attacking option. We saw Castagna as a good option a few weeks ago, who did find his way towards getting attacking returns. But the simple truth is that they will get rotated because they're still involved in Europe. Perhaps the PSV result will change things, but Schmeichel for me is a very sensible best keeper, I would say, to end the season with. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend, let's say, moving away from Ramsdale. Perhaps Arsenal could find a little bit of a solution towards their defensive issues, but he is a very sensible move away from other keepers such as a Jose Sa. If we move on to the midfielders, however, you'll see that the new sort of make weight player who's at that kind of 4.5 4.4 range is Dewsbury Hall. Yes, he had a fantastic haul this weekend, ironically, but I think the worrying thing about him is that he only makes sense really as a transfer if you are looking towards going for a Kane kind of built around team. And if you're not going for a team that involves Kane, and let's say you are happy to end the season with something like a 5-4-1 and going for a budget forward, then I would probably avoid making that sort of make weight move, because I don't really think Dewsbury Hall is going to cover, in a sense, Maddison or Barnes's expected points if they're actually playing the full 90 minutes. He's shown a lot of glimpses this season that he is going to be a main fixture for this Leicester team, and I think clearly Rodgers is someone who is very appreciative of how much he's improved this season and how much he's stepped up, just like in the past with some other Leicester players who've had good seasons and slight blips here and there. But I really think that you have to consider him only if you're looking for Kane. And for those players who are kind of thinking about the option of, let's say, moving between the switch of Son and Kane, as I said a few weeks ago, I wasn't really fond of that for my own team. And unless you're, let's say, someone who doesn't have Son, or actually if you wanted to double up on Son and Kane, then that might make sense to move into Dewsbury Hall as an option towards the end of the season, who could provide you with some points. Otherwise, as I say, if you're moving into players like that, think really wisely about how you want to end the team and the season with in terms of your team structure. As far as McNeil and Cornet, and even an option like Gallagher, these are options that I've actually dropped this week. And the reason why is because I think Gallagher is clearly someone who's dropped a little bit deeper into the field for Crystal Palace, and we've seen a huge drop off in terms of his underlying data when it comes to his productivity in front of goal in terms of expected goals. He is still quite lively in terms of expected assists, but that's simply because he is a free kick taker as well for this Crystal Palace side, who also provides with the set pieces. Towards the end of the season, I really would be looking at the counterpart in terms of Zaha, someone who should be on penalties. As we know, he is someone who also looks very, very good in terms of underlying data, and we know that Crystal Palace's run towards the end of the season is very, very positive, with a double in the future to look at. The weird thing about Zaha's price, of course, he is sort of mixed in and lumped in with players like Mount and Havertz, who've shown really good form lately. I think Havertz has gained the full confidence of Tuchel, and we can sort of see players like Werner and Mount finding a lot of form right now. So I would say, while Havertz pretty much has his role solidified because Lukaku seems to be injured and also playing poorly, and him locking out that central position, it's actually the 10s in the Chelsea system that are actually benefiting a lot. And we can see Mount in that sort of free role doing extremely well. The goal versus Real Madrid is a fantastic example of that, as well as his great performance in the weekend versus Southampton. So that's an interesting little, I think, transfer we'll have to think about in terms of the kind of reverse of the Mount, or rather the Barnes and the Maddison situation that I've kind of alluded. I think this week it's clearly a week where you want to have at least 2 out of 3 of the options in terms of the top tier players between Saka, Maddison, and Barnes. That should give you enough coverage of the Leicester and Arsenal attack. But when we are talking towards the back half of the season and we are looking towards these Chelsea assets, right, their fixtures are quite positive just because they have a good selection of games, and we know that they have the form to tackle on and take on most of these top teams. I think Mount might just be the better option if he is able to find this freer role, because I think he performed extremely well alongside Werner coming back into the team, and I think that might be the sort of enabler that Mount needed to usurp Havertz as the best position. I actually thought Havertz was a better option than Mount heading towards the Southampton game, but for me the tactical changes implemented by Tuchel with the reintegration of Werner makes things a little bit more spicy, and we'll see how the underlying data moves in the near future. As far as Coutinho, he is someone who falls this week just because of the impact of this game week 33. However, moving onwards, I think Coutinho is at a weird price where, once again, he is a little bit more expensive, potentially doesn't have the same sort of single game week basic benefit that I would like to give Zaha and Havertz and Mount in terms of the productivity, but towards the last two fixtures of the season, Coutinho seems to be a great option, and I can see him slowly rise in my cheat sheet towards the back half of the season, and that's probably exactly what's going to happen with Coutinho. I just think he's slightly overpriced right now when we consider the multitude of Leicester options who are much cheaper, players like Saka who are much cheaper, or even Rafinha, for example, who's found a little bit of form with this Leeds team, who are quite capable now of once again scoring and building a solidified amount of chances, with Rafinha being that sort of talismanic figure. And that's sort of why I put Coutinho at that sort of level, just because of the amount of games available and when his games start to turn good. As far as Son, he's been a premium option for many weeks now. I've been very fortunate to have him as my captain. Of course, it's just pure variance with Kane. I think both players have been playing exceptionally well, alongside Kulusevski, who's been deputizing really well and completely replaced Lucas Moura, because I think his impact on the team in terms of how he assists players, how intelligent his decision making is when it comes to assists, has really elevated the Spurs team in terms of actually making them a very, very strong trident, as we saw in terms of glimpses when we were watching the Man City vs Spurs game many game weeks ago. Foden is someone who does fall. I think that Man City will experience rotation. We just saw them beat Atletico Madrid, and that's going to have a lot of impacts with how much rotation there is. I think Foden is seen as a key option for a lot of Man City's games, and I think as we head into the cup fixture where they will be playing in the FA Cup versus Liverpool, there's a lot of thoughts to be kind of had when we consider between like a multitude of Man City options. And a good example of why it's quite dangerous now to look into the Man City midfield is that KDB substitution quite early into the Atletico Madrid game. It seemed like he had completely run out of gas and was sort of starved out of the game just because of the way the game went. And in the weeks ahead, I really think you can see Pep resting some of these key players as soon as, 63 minutes, 64 minutes. We've even seen, for example, Foden being subbed off at 58. It's very possible that this sort of rotation happens because Pep will be trying to manage all three cup competitions at one time. As far as Sancho, the reason why I've dropped him, even though he has potentially two doubles back-to-back, is just because if you look at the overall underlying data for Man United as a team, they have been one of the least creative sides overall in terms of producing expected goals as a team. And he is the third option of this team. When Ronaldo and Bruno are playing, I expect Sancho to kind of be third in terms of points and expected points. And with the amount of goals and chances they're creating, yes, even though they have some good games and some bad games, keep in mind, for example, Liverpool being one of the double game week fixtures, I really struggle to see how Sancho becomes a prime option when you have so many other players in between the 6.1 to sort of 7.9 range who have been creating a lot this season and providing a lot. And even when we look at Diaz and Jota, for example, I just think that their numbers are still a lot better, even though they might have less minutes than Sancho. And that's pretty much what it comes down to. With Sterling and Mahrez, I think they're just slightly overpriced considering the rotation elements. The last sort of topic I think is going to be between Salah, KDB, and Bruno. I think if you are someone who is looking, and perhaps as the week develops, we'll find out that Man United could have a double game week in 34 because of 34, sorry, because of Chelsea actually getting knocked out by Real Madrid in the Champions League. We could actually see Bruno actually move into a full green option, but I'm not actually sure whether I'd be fully comfortable with that right now. I think this is a conditional sort of factor. If you are someone who's free hitting, I would say Bruno is almost a must and perhaps even the default captaincy option alongside someone like a Maddison this week. But because of his permanence in terms of his team and him not being injured, I think he does get the full 90 minutes, whereas I can't say exactly the same for Maddison, who will probably be involved in the PSV game and might be a doubt for one of the games in the double game weeks ahead. And so that's kind of my worry with the Leicester situation, the captaincy option. I think Bruno is a fantastic option to sort of deputize if you want a replacement for Salah, but keep in mind Salah also has a great fixture versus United, and it's very hard, I think, if you're not free hitting to actually look towards making the move towards Bruno, given the drop in form that we've seen at United. But once again, completely dependent on the fixtures being announced and whether we actually have enough news to actually be invested into Bruno. If we go into the attackers, one thing I will say is that, to kind of preface this, I feel like the attackers overall and the forwards in general, the forwards have been really, really poor. And when you're looking at best options, green options, or even orange options, I have to say that they do pale in comparison to the midfield. I wouldn't compare them like for like. It's more that, for example, when I look at Pukki as an option or Tony, who are like the bright green options in this forward list, It's simply because of the comparisons that they have. You only can play one forward, for example, in FPL by minimum, and therefore options like Pookie and Tony have to be by default great options because they are the more consistent strikers that we've seen at the back half of the season. I think Pookie has been very consistent, very steady overall for most of the year. Tony is someone who's found a lot of form lately, especially with Ericsson joining the side, with even Mbumo finding a lot of kind of goal involvements too. As far as Kane, he's been the prime option, and sort of as we illustrated many weeks when we're looking at the 26/28 wildcards and things like that, Kane has been a prime option to kind of go for that 5-4-1 team structure, just because, or even a 4-5-1, for example, because it actually allows for you to actually completely forget about some of these forward options. But my little rant about the forwards aside, Gelhardt remains there. Greenwood is also there as well. I'd probably just add him, but I don't think there's anything significant. It's really just another make weight. Clearly, Dewsbury Hall options like Ramsey are much better in terms of make weights. If you really wanted to look for one in your team when you're trying to stretch towards specific sort of players, let's say Chelsea players or City players who are much more expensive in the midfield, as an example, Pookie is clearly one of the better options. Broja and Mateta still find themselves in a tier below. I just think that Mateta doesn't get enough minutes, for example, in comparison to Pookie. And clearly, whilst Pookie is the talisman of the Crystal Palace team, I can't say the same for Mateta. Yes, Crystal Palace are much more capable of scoring goals and actually creating goals as a team, but Mateta only shares a portion of that, right? Players like Ayew, for example, have been involved lately, and we do see rotation from time to time where Edouard could find his way back into the starting lineup if things change for Patrick Vieira. Broja, for me, is a great option. He was just rested in the Chelsea game, and I think the Southampton team does really benefit from Broja being a part of the side. I think he's a fantastic option. And in terms of strikers, when it comes to being lively, yes, he's someone who hasn't delivered in any points lately, but I think he still passes the eye test for me. And if Southampton, as per usual in the last two seasons, find a way to come back from a very devastating loss, I think Broja is going to be one of those interesting options this week alongside Adams, who is going to be a must-have option, in my opinion, potentially for the free hit, just because he's so much more interesting compared to someone like Wood. But Wood is someone who still rises, and that's the same thing with Tony, where these are penalty takers for teams who have good games. I think Brentford have a decent run of games towards the end of the season. They don't have doubles, unfortunately, and Wood is someone who does have a double. And his ability to perhaps earn penalties through players like St. Maximum will actually benefit him. But Wood is someone who's very similarly to Weghorst, isn't someone I expect to actually score in open play. He's been pretty diabolical, and I would compare him to the Weghorst camp, but I think just because the Newcastle side overall is much more capable of creating chances inside the box, I think the threat of Newcastle getting penalties is much higher with Wood, and I'd be much more tempted to at least go for Wood, who seems just a little bit more lively and much more involved in the actual play, even though he has the same amount of shots as Weghorst in recent memory. Weghorst is someone who, as I mentioned, the underlying data has completely dropped off the clip. We only had a small sample size, and as we've had more data to actually look at Weghorst, he's only turned out to be a worse option, and the eye test is even worse. I think it's been really hard watching Burnley, but specifically as a Weghorst owner, and I really would consider even benching him as someone who owns Weghorst this week and isn't really looking to sell him right now. Adams is someone who does rise for me. I think Adams is interesting because you get the double here, and really when it comes down to Arsenal playing, let's say, Southampton at home, Arsenal are a team who don't look particularly good in the defensive end. I think they're much more looser than they have been, especially with Cedric playing, especially with Nuno Tavares even being an option as well. And as I said, with the midfield spine sort of being torn apart because of the injury situation, I really think that teams are able to score with much more less creative chances. The hallmark of this Arsenal season, in my opinion, is that their individual defenders have been very good and have outperformed how many expected goals that they should have conceded. And now that we've entered a stage where much weaker players are playing for this Arsenal team in terms of the midfield and the defense, I really struggle to see how they will keep as many clean sheets as we projected them to do in the back half of the season, even though they have such great fixtures. And that's why I think Adams is a great option for the double this week, and someone who I would definitely consider on a free hit. Watkins is someone who falls similarly to Coutinho. I think he is someone you want to consider towards the back half of the season. He's just a little bit overpriced, and I think we are looking more towards these budget differentials as we look to beef up the midfield and the defense. People are going big at the back now. People are going for 5 midfielders, including even maybe 2 Chelsea/Man City midfielders who are at that 7 to 8 price range. And because of that, you're going to have to try and make way with some of the forwards that are expensive, and Watkins is one of them who I don't think really justifies his cost. His only recent goal involvement was a penalty, and that's not really good enough, in my opinion. It's kind of like going for Wood and being happy about him scoring a penalty. I don't think he's a permanent option. Wood is clearly just someone here that you'd consider for the free hit. As far as Lacazette, he's someone who falls too. I just think that this Arsenal team, once again, he will be someone who plays a much more supportive role. He's a little bit too overpriced. You want to be making sure that your team's balanced around the midfield and the defense, who are really the kind of the points earners, unless you own Kane. And that's sort of the situation with Lacazette. I don't think Arsenal have dropped off tremendously from the attacking stats, but the comparison always is going to be that the Arsenal midfielders are much cheaper and also have much better underlying data than Lacazette. As far as Kane, clearly the best option in the game. I haven't decided to move Ronaldo up similarly to Bruno. I think even if they do have confirmed doubles, there's a high chance he gets rotated. Not even sure exactly what happened in the week with the kind of phone situation with the child. Not really a pleasant sight to see. And I don't know if anything's going to happen to that, but that's sort of the situation as it stands for the cheat sheet in Game Week 33. I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead and much more green arrows.